Chris Herring is my guest. Chris, good to have you back. How are you?
I'm great, Jim. How are you, my man?
Good, dude. Good. Great to have you. So a wild game one between the Nets and Celtics. Let me start right there. What was your reaction, Chris, to the final play of that game and the way that game ended?
Mostly the cojones of Marcus Smart to, the ball gets kicked out to him with, 4 seconds left. And for him to put the ball on the deck and, to make a play and to look to pass the ball in what was not the most open window to Jason Tatum. Jason Tatum had to make a move and kind of maneuver and spin around to make the game-winning shot. That all happened in stride within the last 3-4 seconds of the game. It's a pretty incredible play. The other thing that stands out to me is Ime Udoka not, kind of resisting the urge to call a timeout there after you grab a rebound and just kind of play it out, realizing that it might hinder the defense to basically have to play without a whistle and without getting a chance to set up the defense. So there's a lot that happened just in the last minute of that game, but it was what a game it was for a game one. Also, just to think of the Nets and the Celtics playing in first round is just insane.
It is insane. Chris Herring joining us. To that point about game one, that did not feel at all like a game one. Like, if that's the intensity and the action you get for game one, which is supposed to be a feel-out game, what are you expecting to see the rest of the series?
I'm not sure. I look at that, and I think several things. Kyrie, for all the back and forth that we've all had and all talked about all season, the guy was incredible. Just every defender you could imagine in his face, him hitting those shots. Part of me wonders if maybe I underestimated the Nets. They basically struggled to beat everybody. They've won games, obviously, to get into the playoffs. But part of me is wondering, can they just kind of will this to a 6th, 7th game, despite the fact that really it's not as talented a roster as what is what the Celtics have, top to bottom, obviously. But Kyrie, if he can do that, if Durant shoots better and can kind of find a way to shake Jason Tatum from time to time, maybe it's a longer series. I picked the Celtics in 5 just because I figured two guys can't do this for a whole series between Durant and Kyrie. But Kyrie, we underestimate how little he actually played this season. And if this is him completely comfortable, if the minutes don't bother him, if the stage doesn't bother him, he's playing in Boston and he's playing like this. So maybe it's a longer series, and maybe the depth isn't as big a factor as what I thought it would be. I still think it may be at some point.
Chris Herring is joining us. Chris, one more thought about Kyrie. He had 39 and obviously played lights out. But what do you make of the fact? Obviously the Celtic fans do not like him. We know this because of how things went down in Boston. He's made no secret that he's not real fond of them either. What do you make of him flipping off the fans multiple times yesterday and F-bombing them after the game?
Yeah, I'm never going to be pro-swear at fans, but at the same time, I will say this. It does kind of feel like we're in an environment now where there's an effort to provoke a reaction out of people. And does that mean the players should be smarter? I'll leave that up to someone else about actually feeding into that. But at the same time, there is a part of me that kind of feels like if you can't take it, don't dish it as a fan. And, at this point, some of the stuff has been over the line, in my opinion. Kyrie had something thrown at him last season, if I remember correctly, during a game back in Boston. It's very clear he is not fond of the fan base. He did go out of his way yesterday to say it's not all the fans. It's kind of a select few that make a point to try to get under his skin. And I think if you want to say it's getting under his skin, that's fine, but he's also playing his butt off. So, like I said, I'll never advocate for someone responding the way he has, but I'm also not going to make him a pariah for doing it, because fans, I think, on some level are kind of hoping that he'll react that way, and he's just playing into it, but he's also playing well. So on some level, it's almost kind of like, what difference does it make to me?
A lot of action for one game. Chris Herring is joining us. All right, so let me get your thoughts about Golden State. They blow the Nuggets out in game one. Jordan Poole, Chris, had 30 on 13 shots in his first playoff game. When Golden State's got that guy playing like that, how different is that team?
A lot different, considering that, in particular, Steph Curry missed so much time, and we weren't even sure up until the day of whether he was going to play. The idea that Steph Curry comes off the bench and then acknowledges that the reason he was okay with doing that, among others, was that Jordan Poole was playing so well. and the idea that he doesn't mind kind of letting him get his feet under him as Steph comes off the bench. On some level, you're not missing and you're not as thirsty for Steph Curry's production as he's just trying to get back into a rhythm when Jordan Poole plays like that. I mean, that's a scary team when you've got three guys that can shoot the way that they can. And the idea of being able to get Steph kind of back up to speed, they didn't miss a step there, and that was critical just to be able to kind of have that kind of game one performance. Nikola Jokic can't really get comfortable defensively with all the shooting they present, and to tire him out defensively works wonders for what you're able to kind of do and take away from him offensively in terms of how hard you're making him work. Most teams don't do that, and this is an exception with what Golden State can do.
We're talking to Chris Herring. All right, Chris, you have the SI Daily cover today with your piece on the Toronto-Philadelphia series, so let me take you right there. If you had told Nick Nurse before Game 1 that he would hold Joel Embiid and James Harden to 11 of 32 shooting, what do you think he would have said? And then how do you explain exactly what did happen?
Yeah, it's funny. Part of me wonders, because he and I did talk a lot about this as I was writing this piece beforehand, and I was basically kind of asking him, like, it's always a complete mystery box as to what Toronto's going to do defensively and what they were trying to do defensively and trying to make someone other than Embiid beat them. So I feel like, on the one hand, Nick Nurse would have smiled if I told him that they'd held Embiid and Harden to 11 of 32 before Game 1. But I think he probably would have turned the tables and made himself the reporter for one question and said, how did the other guys shoot? And that was the problem with Game 1, is that Tyrese Maxey basically didn't miss 38 points, a career high in the playoffs. And Tobias Harris, who obviously has had his struggles in the playoffs before, goes off for 26. That's not going to cut it. You can't let those guys have 64, 65 points on you in a game, because you know that Embiid and Harden, even if they're not efficient, they're still going to score 15, 20 on their own. And that was essentially what happened. And so you can't let the rest of the team shoot 50% from three. And the biggest thing, and I think this was kind of where the game was lost in some ways, the Raptors turned their opponents over more than anybody else in the league. They score more off of those turnovers than anybody else in the league. The Sixers didn't have a turnover until the third quarter. They had 29 assists against 4 turnovers. So you can't win games like that. And, so they're probably going to try to do a lot of the same thing, but I imagine that they would probably play Embiid and Harden straight up more often, just as a way to try to make sure that Maxey and Tobias Harris, Danny Green, people like that aren't getting off the way that they were able to in Game 1. If that happens, there's no chance in the series, especially with Scotty Barnes being out, Thaddeus Young being out, Gary Trent Jr., maybe their best perimeter shooter being out. They're shorthanded now, and it changes the dynamic, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. That's my thing. They're busted up. I think if they're healthy and you get their best shot, they're a really dangerous team, but they are really banged up right now.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, really quickly, Chris, before you go off the board with this, I love this. I want to talk to you about a California team that's not in the playoffs, but not the Lakers. I want to talk to you about Sacramento. The 16th straight year they have missed the postseason. You wrote a piece where you mentioned considering them as a follow-up for the Blood in the Garden. What intrigues you about them? What made you say that?
I mean, they are just a team that, I think a lot of first-time authors, when they finish the first book, they think, what next? And I think for a lot of us, it's natural to say, okay, I had success with this one. Let me find something that's in the same vein. And I don't know that there's an NBA team that has as parallel a history, at least over the last 20 or 30 years, as there is with the Kings and the Knicks. Obviously, the Knicks are a huge market. Sacramento is not. Sacramento was at risk of losing their team to Seattle. So obviously there's that. But as far as a team having a really wonderful, enchanted period of basketball and then just watching the wheels come off almost instantly after that, I think that's kind of what we are looking at when we talk about the Kings. They had a very fun team in those early 2000s. They should have beaten the Lakers once, and there are all sorts of reasons for that, controversial reasons for that. But they've been horrible ever since, and I think there's a pretty clear line as to kind of how that happened. And I think telling that story, I think a lot of people there would love to read the book. I don't know that it would have the biggest readership outside of Sacramento, which is part of the reason I chose not to take it on. But I do think that it's a fascinating story. I don't know that they changed the league as much as those Knicks teams did. So I think that would be the one other factor of maybe why I didn't do it. But I think that it's a fascinating story.
I'll tell you what, Chris, Sacramento's always been a really important market to me in this program, and I was there in those days. I remember John Barry, when he played, he said, Rome, come to Sacramento, come to Sacramento. I said, hey, John, I'll come, and we'll do a tour stop, quote unquote, if you can deliver me your teammates. And sure enough, I went there not once but twice. And this is the crazy thing, Chris. 18,000 people showed up. It was free, but they showed up to see me get on stage with C. Webb, White Chocolate, Vlade, the Maloofs, John Barry. I mean, I saw it firsthand. It was insane. The energy in Arco Arena, even for a radio slug like me, was like the most amazing thing you have ever seen. So, to your point, outside of Sacramento, I'm not really sure what that book would do, but I saw it firsthand. It was incredible.
People love that team, and I think that you feel it when you're there at the games, and I wish we could feel it more often. It's just been so long since they've been relevant, but there's always a nostalgia when teams have had that long of a dry spell. And so that was what intrigued me. It's not to say I would never do it, maybe at some point, but a fascinating story just as far as what they were and what they are right now.
Never say never. He is a senior writer at SI, the co-host of Open Floor, SI's NBA show, a New York Times best-selling author. We mentioned the book, Blood in the Garden, which is a tremendous read. Chris, great to have you back. Thank you very much. Always good talking to you.
You too, man. Thanks so much.
Be good, dude.